Hello, everyone. It's time for Catalog and Cocktails, presented by Data.World. It's your honest, no BS, non salesy conversation about enterprise data management with delicious beverages in hand. I am Tim Gasper, longtime data nerd product guy at Data.World, joined by Juan Cicada. Hey, Juan.
Tim, how are you doing? It is Wednesday, middle of the week, end of your day, and we are finally back live because it's been a couple of weeks. We've even had a lot of travel and stuff. And it's always great to do this live. I really miss it, being back here at home and stuff. And really, really excited because you know what? When you actually meet people on the road, and then you meet people who we constantly meet them, and then we know that they're listening to the podcast, and they actually get to be a guest in the podcast. That is just so exciting and very humbling too. And I'm really excited to have Francis O'Rafferty, who is a senior manager at Baringa, to be our guest today. Francis, thank you for being here. I mean, so many times we've bumped into each other at conferences, at meetups, at happy hours. It's a pleasure to finally have you here on the podcast. How are you doing?
Yeah, no, I'm great. It's great to be here. Really looking forward to this chat.
Right. Well, let's kick it off first with our tell and toast. What are we drinking and what are we toasting for today? Francis, kick us off.
I'm going first, am I? So I have a non-alcoholic pink gin and tonic. So keeping it colourful while still abstaining during Lent. And I am toasting for progress in data being talking about at a senior level of non-data people.
Progress.
We were just talking about that before we kicked off here about what's changing in data. You know, the leaders, they're finally listening. They're hungry. No, that's awesome. And I'm excited to try some non-alcoholic gin. That sounds like fun. I'm drinking a busted pipe cocktail, which is, so I've been very into Amaro Nonino lately. It's a pretty cool, kind of sweet, slightly bitter aperitif. And I'm drinking it. It's got Old Forester 1897 bottled in bottled in Bond bourbon. Also cherry, and also I don't have lemon, so I put bergamot in it, which sounds fancier anyways. So pretty tasty.
And I am having this. I don't have a name. I actually just gave it a ChatGPT, and it said it's a Lone Star Fizz, but I don't like it. It's gin infused tea, Saint Germain Texas honey with a splash of sparkling water in it. It's the water made it to kind of pass the not too sweet, so really refreshing and it was really good. So cheers to progress and leadership.
Cheers.
Cheers to that. All right, so we have our warm-up question, which is, what is something you have built trust in over time?
So I think there's two in I guess in the data space. I'm going to stick in the data space.
Okay.
But I think there's two things that I really feel like I built trust in over time. So the first one was it's around the transformation. So building trust during transformation. So I think people find transformation quite a scary time. There's a lot of uncertainty. There's a lot of pressure to get it done quick because the project managers are pushing it forward. There's a lot of other pressures to get it done right. And quite often you end up with this kind of mix of, let's just move everything, we'll sort it out later, and then that never happens. So there's a couple of things that I've worked on in the data space around how do you kind of build that framework so that you can move things, you can migrate things, you can transform things whilst still having that kind of trusted base layer as you come in. So that's I think that there's an almost like a layer of that, and there's how you kind of do that initial stakeholder meeting, make sure you understand everything's right. There's then that next level of, how do you then prove that what you're saying is true? And I think it's that what are people's insecurities? How do you then expose those to say, actually, that's not a problem, and I can prove it because I have the evidence here, or I accept that that's an insecurity and this is what we can do to work around it, and here's the evidence, here's the growth. And it's the kind of building those steps on the journey. And I think trust comes from like solid roots, understanding, listening to each other, communicating, and then adding the layers. And I think those transformations where I've really seen them take off, I've been really proud of the trust that I've built there.
That's a very profound way to kick this off. That's an excellent soundbite right here. I love this.
Yeah, I just took a note in our notes and I was like, that was good. We didn't even start the podcast for real yet, and that was really good.
I don't know if I want to follow up on that.
I did hat on.
Do you want to follow up?
No. Let's jump in because, I mean, honestly, I was thinking like, what do I trust? I was like, you know what? I trust my weather app a lot more lately than I used to. But I was like, that's a stupid answer compared to what you just said.
I was thinking of something funny with my kids or something, but no. Let's just dive into it. So you already set the bar here. All right, honest, no BS. We're talking about trust here. We always talk about being data driven, but actually, how do you become data and trust driven?
Yeah, so I think it's using your data as your conscience. So instead of just going to your gut every time and saying, yes, I trust it because I've got a feeling, or I trust that you meet someone new, you have a good feeling about them, you start to trust them, versus building trusted data of trust over time, which is, I have evidence of this, I have facts, I have the ability to kind of move forward. And I think that's where I see the difference. Data driven is you've got some data in front of you, you're making decisions with it, versus you've got data in front of you and you're making decisions with it because you've got additional trust metrics around it. You know where it's come from. You've kind of used it for a period of time. You've got other people that will vouch for it. That's the kind of difference. There's the kind of, I'm making these decisions from data without actually looking at what that data is telling you, or understanding it, versus making decisions from data that you really do understand.
So the understanding is super important there. You used the word conscience at the beginning for a second.
Yeah.
Well, can you say that again? I missed that phrase.
Yeah, so I think I often think of trust as like, if I have the conscience in the back of my head that's kind of going, I don't really trust this, or I have a really good feeling about it. And I think that you listen to that more. If you see some numbers and it doesn't pass that sniff test, your conscience is going, I see the numbers, it's there, but I don't believe it. And it's that, how do you, if it's something that you're not expecting and you see it, how do you believe something? And that comes back to the understanding.
And ideally, you don't have to rely on that sort of sniff test or that feeling, right? It's something more embedded and engineered, that that you can trust something, that you really understand the meaning of something.
Exactly.
Well, I think it goes back to it's that combination of having our intuition, but it's not just that, right? So it's combining our intuition, that sniff test and stuff, with like, okay, well, let's go ... Let's go figure out what is the next step, which leads me to ask, like, so let's kind of break this up. What do we define here as trust? Because I think we're now throwing this word trust all over the place. We're throwing the terms AI-ready data, and AI-ready data is data that I trust, and it's data that I mean. And so, what is trust?
Yeah, and I think, yeah, I mean, if you go to the data dictionary, it's something like, firm belief. Yeah, but I think really it's you feel comfortable with it. You feel like you're, it's that thing that, if you think of it as a person and you do all those exercises, right, you lean back, you get the person catch you, right? Like, where's our data going to catch us? Like, where's it going to stop us making mistakes? Like, can you get to a point where you actually trust that your data is going to prevent you from doing something stupid? And I think it is that you have a firm belief in the ability of it to give you the right answer.
So this is utmost confidence.
Yes, I like that.
This is, or we're making this list right. It's a firm belief, the utmost confidence. Thank you, Tim, for writing those notes. Yeah. So, but this is a combination of not just, again, goes back to the tech, the people, the process. But so how do you start building this trust? I mean, because I think about it as like, you're in an organization and you're new to an organization. Like, how do you build and how do you use that trust? Or you've been there for so long that there's different trust factors around that, right? Mm-hmm. So the trust isn't just a 1 or 0; it's on and off, right? I think there's like some sort of a spectrum depending on the domain that you're in, the environment that you're in, your own background, the history that you've had. I mean, there's just so many different angles around this stuff where it's not just an easy thing to say, like, we talk about this also like with quality. Like people are like, what is the quality of this data? Wait, you want me from 0 to 100? Like, what does that number mean? Is it green, yellow, red? Like, what is the trust? Is it green, yellow, red? So I think there's I want to unpack this a little bit more.
And how do these things connect? There's a lot of companies out there that say, "Oh, our biggest problem is data quality," right? But then you ask them, "But are you data driven?" And they're like, "Yeah, we're data driven." So what? You're data driven on poor quality data? Like that sounds like an oxymoron.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it was interesting. The last project that I started, one of my colleagues was like, "So how do I know that they trust the data? Like, how do I measure it?" And I was like, "Well, if you ask them, like what's actually the problem?" So I think part of it is go find out where they are on that trust trust line, right? And how trustworthy do they think the data is right now? Because a lot of people do say, "Oh, we know that it's not good," but that's about as much as you get out of it. And then you start asking, well, what would you use it to do, and what do you have to then change when you're doing that? And you ask a number of questions about, would you be comfortable sending this to the regulator as it is? No. Okay, right. We're down a bit, right? Would you be comfortable making a decision on whether or not to write, I work a lot in the financial service. Would you give someone a loan? Would you give someone insurance? Would you, how much do you trust the stuff that's there? And then what you find out is they go, "Oh, well, I used it this time and this happened. And I actually, it then cost us like X amount because we had this really, we tried to fix this thing and the data quality went wrong. And everyone knows that there's this problem from like 2012 that still exists in our data set," right? So you start to then unpack the history, and you can then sort of weigh in a bit to, okay, well, this is still a problem because it's relevant on recent data. How much of a problem is this because it's actually stale and old, and we've got this nervousness that this thing happened once, but it hasn't actually happened for the last 10 years. So actually maybe we're past that. And it's kind of just analyzing where they are on that scale and then starting to move slowly back through evidence to get to a point where people do trust it more. But it's always a different starting point.
This is really interesting how you set this up, and I never thought about it this way, is of having. So step back. I always think about things as a spectrum, right? There's a pendulum, it swings side by side, right? All that stuff. So there's always a spectrum. But then you have to have also kind of these questions to figure out to identify what part of the spectrum you are in, right? So it's like, okay, let's take up this has to be the super highest trusted data everybody's. You're sending to the regulators. Okay, no, okay. What is a question that goes a little notch below, go below, all the way to like, I wouldn't let anybody look at this data. Then like that's garbage. Just throw it away, right? So it's interesting that I think this makes me realize that we need to understand what are those types of questions that kind of that are assigned to each part of the spectrum, and how those are different questions for different domains, for different parts of the organization too. And different people will have different answers for the same question.
Yeah. And you quite often find that when you start to say like, what do you do on a daily basis? How do you interact with data? And you'll get some people that just say, "Oh, well, I have this report and I use that and I make this decision off it," right? You'll have other people that say, "Well, I get this spreadsheet from someone and then I compare it with this spreadsheet from someone else. And then I kind of do a bit of logic and apply something that I then think is right to get this other answer. And then that's what I trust." You'll get people that will accept what's given to them in the report, and you'll get other people that will want to go back and look at the source data and prove that it's right all the way through. So there's different levels as well, depending on the personality. So there is what's your experience? What's your personality? How much of a detailed person are you? And they will demand different things. And I think that's really interesting because depending on which spectrum your stakeholder sits in, they will want a slightly different level of trust to be trusted data.
This is actually a pretty complicated aspect of data trust, or trust in general, but certainly data trust, is, I think a lot of times when we talk about trust, or more specifically data quality, which I think is just one aspect of how to create trust around data, people often talk about like fit for purpose, which is like, well, what are you trying to do with that data, right? And depending on that purpose may affect whether or not you can call it high quality or low quality data, whether you can call it trusted or untrusted data. But perhaps, especially with trust, there's, to your point, a very personal aspect to it, where some of us might be much more open-minded to like, oh, you told me all the like all the checks passed, cool, I'm happy, right? Or a person I trust sent me this report, so therefore I trust this report. Versus somebody who's like, I don't know about that. Like, where did you get this data? Like, I have my own spreadsheet that I pulled together. Let me compare. I'm going to do an A/B comparison. So it's a very trust is a very personal thing too.
It is. And I mean, if you think when you go on Amazon to buy something, right, you look at how many people have reviewed it. You look at like, has it got 5 stars? Has it got 1 star? And then you make a decision whether you think it's going to actually do what it says it does when it turns up, right? So it's a similar thing. If people sort of say, I trust this report and this is the one I use, other people will follow and use that. If if there's a data set that people go, oh, I used that and it was garbage, it starts to get a bad reputation. People aren't going to use it.
So let's tie that. I want to tie this into the whole data product and data marketplace, which is something that we're seeing now more and more. And I think part of that is having like the social aspect of rating and reviewing, right? As you just mentioned, right? Like people go buy things on Amazon. Your shopping experience, you buy that because there's trust signals based on reviews and stuff. Is this the way forward? Like, so I'm like, my immediate thought is like, yes, let's go ahead and rate some reviews. That's how we're going to quote unquote address the trust situation. But is that really the way to go do that? I mean, is there a different way? Is there how can we expand that? Are we thinking too narrow-minded? What should we think out of the box, or maybe not? Well, let's not get too complicated about it.
Yeah, no, I think there's a couple of different ways, because not everything wants to be a data product. I'm sure you've heard people say that a lot. So there are other data sets which, there's a project that I worked on a while ago, which was all kite marking. So it was like, right, we'll kite mark data to say this data is this level of, you can use it for exploratory purposes. Please don't use it for regulatory purposes. So you grade the level of the data and sort of say, the example that I quite often come back to is if you've got some customer data and you are using it to kind of write something relatively informal email or a marketing campaign, if you haven't got the middle name of the person, or you haven't got the full name quite right as a nickname, it's probably not going to be a problem. If you're doing a credit check on that person, suddenly that is a big problem. So it's, grading different data to say this is allowed, and it comes back to the usage as well, right? We're grading this as regulatory, like very high quality data, versus this is just exploratory data that no one is necessarily doing a lot of DQ monitoring on, no one's checking, no one's regularly looking after it. The high quality, high grade data is stuff that people are checking on a daily basis. They are putting data quality validations in place. They are proactively monitoring it. So I think you can do that with data products, but I think you can also do it with just source data or data sets or anything else that you want to kind of group data in.
Yeah, that makes sense. When I see folks try to organize data, whether it's in a catalog or through any other means by like, is this exploratory? Is it regulatory? Like there's, I think, a lot of dimensions to look at the quality of the data, the purpose of the data, the criticality of the data, things like that. Do you see ways of organizing or curating the information that's more effective than others to kind of demonstrate the level that you might be able to trust something? Like, I know, for example, some organizations really love like medallion approach. They're like, I want to do bronze and silver and gold, and the platinum is the data that you can really trust. And, other people prefer simpler things like, oh, it's just certified and not certified. Have you seen certain approaches that you like better to try to show what's trusted data?
Honestly, I think it really depends on the stakeholders and who you're working with, because there will be people that just hate medallion architecture. There'll be people that just love it. And it's like, if you go in and say, we'll do it medallion architecture, then you'll guarantee you'll hit the person that goes, I don't like medallion architecture. Please don't give me that.
We used it in my previous company and I hated it. And you're like, oh, what?
Yeah. So it's very much finding the language that works for the organization. And I think it doesn't really matter as long as you understand what it means to you internally, and it's more important to make people aware of what they can and can't use it for, whichever scale works for you.
Yeah. What about the user-centric aspect of it? Are there ways to surface that signal? And like, for example, I've talked to companies that are excited about social signals. Like, for example, like, oh, we'll let people give a 5-star rating on data and they can give their personal testimonial onto like how it helped them for whatever thing. And other people are like, no, I definitely don't want any stakeholders putting ratings, because like they might just give me 1 star because, I was too slow in responding to their email or something like that. I don't know if you're curious if you have any thoughts on some of those social type signals.
Yeah, I think behavioral stuff works. I think it does work well. I think if you say to someone, you are owning this, and it's up to you to, there has to be some ownership at some point. It can't be you've created this data set and you're a bit worried that somebody's going to complain about it. If you've done the data set, you own it, you deliver it. And I think the ownership gets lost in some of the handshakes that we've introduced into the data lifecycle a bit. You have, observability within engineering, you then pass that over to analytical engineers, you then pass that over to report developers. And I think that the teams where I've seen it work really well is where there's either strong owners, and especially strong product owners, if you're doing data products, that will, when you get to the end, say, yes, I've created something good.
So we got a really good comment here, and let's go discuss this one. So Andrew just said, I like medallions for underlying tables, models in the warehouse, but then certified yes and no for outputs like dashboards. So if I unpacked it, I was thinking about a little bit this right before he brought up this comment. So for one is like, we can take a very kind of technical approach, kind of almost like a bottoms up approach of data. Oh, is this trustworthy, right? Is this right? Is this platinum and beautiful to go use? Or we could go no, this is a use case approach around this, right? So this is what the users, but it doesn't have to be one or the other. It could be a combination. I think he brought up like, yeah, you have both. And you think about it as if we start getting a little bit more pedantic on the data products and the output ports and stuff, right? Like this is the product that supports all these output ports, which are these dashboards and whatever, and each one of those things can have their certification for a use case. All right, I'm ranting. But question is this combination of medallion and certification. Let's unpack this a little bit more.
Yeah, and I've actually come up against this before, where the data engineering team have used medallion architecture within the engineering, and then it's been like, well, we can't use bronze, silver, gold at a certification level for data sets because there's too many. You need something different. We can't have the same terminology in different places because it doesn't work. Certified yes or no, I think works it probably does work in most industries. In FS, there's usually a level of regulatory as well, and you would need that top level, which is a bit more scrutinized.
So there's at least 3 tiers then in that scenario.
Yeah. So I think depending on what the use cases are at the end, there may be levels. If it's actually quite plain yes or no, then you could just have yes or no. I think it comes back to what's the usage.
That's a good point on some of the naming conflicts too, because you can start to fall down too much of a complicated rabbit hole if you're like, well, this is a silver dashboard using a bronze semantic model, but on gold data. So can I trust it? I don't know.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, that's a t-shirt. And the trust is yellow today.
What's the aggregated trust, right?
That should be okay. Okay, we got to build our t-shirt store one day, but that was going to go there. I got well. So the question is, if we start slicing and dicing this, okay, we'll have the medallion one, and then we'll have the certified ones, but then you're like, but it needs to have this thing and then that thing, and then probably we're just getting too complicated here. But and then like, well, we want to formalize and create these frameworks for trust. And I'm like, but then at the end of the day, this is like a more of a human aspect. Like the person is going to go, you ask somebody, they're going to say, I trust it, I don't trust it, or they're like, I don't know. It's kind of almost those. I would think it's kind of those three aspects.
Yeah.
I don't know.
And I think the things that people trust are the things that people are going to go back and use, right? So ignoring everything else of how you should measure these things, if you just looked at usage, right? If you've got something that's certified versus not certified, who's going to go and use the non-certified ones? Like there is that kind of a question as well of, if it's not certified, is anyone actually using it? Should we just be retiring it? Is a non-certified a pre-prod? Like, so, what does non-certified mean?
Well, so then going back to like what we're seeing now in this notion of marketplaces, then technically anything that's in the marketplace that people can go shop should only be certified, right? And then period, right? Because otherwise, like, why are you selling me a piece of crap, right? So, but then if you go back to like more of the technical stuff, you can find things that are either not certified because they're deprecated, we're going to turn it off, or like, we're working on it. Hold on, we're going to make this better. So
or this is certified for data science use because it's a huge, massive, wide table. But please don't give it to anyone in the business, because it's not the right thing for them to look at, and they'll just get lost in this really wide table.
The business users love one wide table.
Wide.
Slice and dice to your heart's content.
They're not going to know what to look at.
I can apply 30 filters. No, this is fun. This is a fun conversation. Zooming out for a little bit here. I feel like more often I hear data leaders talking about quality and governance than trust specifically. And I'm wondering, do you see trust as being kind of part of those two things? Do you see it as like an overarching thing that kind of these things are a part of? Like, how should organizations think about trust, and are they thinking enough about trust?
Yeah, and I think some people talk about trust, understanding, lineage, ownership as well. So there's a lot of things mixed up in there. But ultimately, I think most of it does come under trust at the end. So your quality is telling you, how good is it? Your metadata is basically telling you what it is. So there's no point in knowing, oh, my customer data is 95% accurate if you don't actually know what your my top customer data is 95% accurate, but what is my top customer? So you need the language with it as well to get the trust. There's a bit of, this marketplace and things. If it's not easy to find and it's not clear within the marketplace what a certified, non-certified product is, people aren't going to trust it. So there's a bit around how do you actually present that, shop front for data back to people. There is a bit of, I know, like from my BI days, people would be like, we have thousands of dashboards, and you'd be like, okay, so who uses them? Which ones can you trust? There's a bit of a retention bit there as well. Without the kind of governance, the retention policies, how do you trust that what you've got is the right stuff? And it's not like, am I looking at the right version of the data? Like, do I have multiple versions of a dashboard? Am I looking at the right one? And so that level of trust as well. And then I think the main one is, what do other people think about it? And it is a people thing. People will trust the other data that people use. So if you have like, one of the things that I think would be great is when you join an organization, you go for your induction, how often do you get introduced to data at that point? It's never favorited in browsers. It's never part of the induction, but you want people to be data driven. You want people to trust the organizational data and use it. So put data into the people side of it as well, and get people using it in the way you want to use it. And I think once somebody uses something that they like and promotes it, other people will then come along. So I think it's quality, it's metadata, it's the discoverability stuff, it's the working together and building trust together, and getting rid of the stuff that's just noise.
I think that's a great framework. Get rid of the stuff that's just noise, and all of this kind of then rolls up to trust, how we engendering trust in the data.
So right here, I like this whole thing about when employees get onboarded, right? So I'm having this thought right now is we so many dashboards, right? We have all these dashboards. We have the data swamps and all these tables and all that stuff. And now we are now talking about data products and data marketplaces, right? So that's kind of a relatively, I mean, the data product is the thing that, sorry, I'm going to offend people here, but it's the thing that survived the data mesh. So it's a good thing. Now, we have an opportunity right now, I feel, as a community, as an industry, to say, look, we have lived through all of this swampness and building all these dashboards, and we have an opportunity to basically start from scratch on this new concept of a data product. And going back to what you were saying is like, it's certified or it's not. Like, why would he even allow people to know that there's access? Don't give them access to non-certified stuff, right? So effectively, is this an opportunity to kind of, we have an opportunity to start from scratch, and we can do this right in the sense that we're always going to have a minimal amount, or not even minimal. The data products that are accessible are obviously going to be certified. Like, you could obviously use them, but we're actually good. You actually know what you can go use them for. So they're very tied to the use cases, and you'll have people's experiences tied to them. Like, oh, I use it for this thing. Here's the example of a project or an application I use. Here's a decision that was made by combining these data products. Like, and therefore you, like, everything that exists in, call it, your data marketplace, there's a reason for its existence, and there's evidence, and basically anything that's there is of trust to somebody because somebody has been used, somebody got value, somebody made something important with it, and so we have that opportunity right now, and if we don't, and we can obviously go down the other route, and then suddenly we're gonna have the data marketplace swamp or whatever shit we want to go do, and then we have to have the catalog. The catalog's the data marketplace. The marketplace on top of another catalog, and all that bullshit that we can happen.
And I mean, I think the bit that's going to govern it is having proper ownership around it. If someone owns something, if somebody's responsible for it, they don't want to look after it anymore if it's not useful. So they'll get rid of it, right? They don't want that extra thing to look after on the side. And which I think, part of the problem before is it's been so easy just to make a new report, make a new data set, put it out into the world, and then never really go back and look at it. And I think that whole product ownership and product management is probably more important than the product itself, and how you kind of keep the stuff in there from going stale. And I'm always very much like, if you're going to build a product, be aware of when do you not want it anymore? When does it become a burden rather than an asset?
So and I think a trend that we've been seeing in the last couple of months too, probably it's getting bigger and bigger now, and I'm gonna guess it's actually kind of part of, like, after this new year, people are like thinking about what is changing and stuff. Is governance is kind of looking cool because we're talking here about, we're having this conversation about trust because we want people to go use the data, because we're talking about data products because people want to go do things, kind of start almost from scratch, and the opportunity to generate great value with this data. AI needs data they trust. Who's owning this? Like, who's talk about, where is the metadata? What is it? Give me the quality. Tell me how good is it. The metadata tell me what it is, and the semantics that helps understand more about this. Like, I know we don't like the governance label that much because it like feels so much compliancy and so forth, but that's still all that governance work. And I feel that right now this is kind of like the next, has the opportunity to be the next cool thing.
Yeah, I think it needs a new name, as we do with data rules, right? We give them a new name and they become cool again. But yeah, I think it's bringing together a lot of the stuff that has been separated over the years. And I think that, bringing quality monitoring, bringing metadata capture into the build of everything that we do is just going to become second nature again.
Coming back to the name piece, I feel like it's been at least 10 episodes since we've talked about the name governance, so it's okay to come back to it now. Do you have names that you prefer? Do you like, people talk about data enablement as something, but then some people hate it. They're like, oh, but it's so much more than data enablement. Well, it's so much more than governance too, right? Curious about you if you have thoughts on that.
Yeah, I've heard data enablement a lot. Sometimes just talking about trusted data is like we are gonna, because that's end to end, right? It's the whole data management stuff. I guess the other one is, what's the other one that I heard? I heard another good one. Data ownership gets talked about a lot more as well. So data ownership as a, rather than, I'm going to talk about data governance and have stewards, and I'm going to have all the kind of different roles and responsibilities. People are just talking about, right, data ownership across the business, right? How does the business, how do they work together in that sense as well? I've probably heard that referred to more. But yeah, I guess it feels like it's almost like it either gets taken up to a higher level or it gets broken down to a lower level of what you'd actually have originally said, yes, this is blanket what data governance is. But I think a lot of the enablement stuff comes from the kind of move to more of a hub and spoke model and people wanting to work in domains and give business. Like the other thing that got, remained from data mesh is the, let's be more domain focused and let's give the data to the people that know it best, right? So I think the enablement comes a bit from that as well, of right, that central data function who are doing that governance bit and the management bit are enablers for business teams to then go and have a platform to do their deeper analysis on.
I feel like we're still struggling with this as an industry. Like what are the titles? What's the name of the function? Like I've seen some customers we work with, for example, that will have like a data strategy office, and then there's like a data governance leader, there's a data quality leader. I actually see this a little bit more in Europe, I feel like, than in the US, where like in Europe, you might actually literally have somebody whose title is like data quality manager or something like that. Where in the US, it's like, I don't know, like the engineering teams have to figure out data quality, right?
Yeah. I mean, I found that the last year or two, I've met a lot more analytics engineers, which I hadn't heard of a lot before then. So that always feels to me like we said, right, data engineers will sit in the central team and they will do all the heavy lifting and they'll scrape the data and they'll put it into this format. And then we'll have all the analysts that sit in the business. The analysts will do all cool things with it. And then we realize that, you actually need someone in the middle that does that semantics bit, that turns that kind of, what do you call, flattened data into the conformed layer, which then the analysts can use. And that's where I feel that analytical engineer is now sitting, and they seem to be sitting more in the business as well. So yeah, that's the structure I've seen in quite a few places recently.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't think it's a one size fits all at all. And I think, data quality is sometimes separate. It's sometimes within that wider enablement team. So we will help support, we'll work with engineers to ensure we've got those quality metrics measured, that the stuff that goes into this kind of flattened layer ready for people to pull out is good quality, right? At the kind of the shift left approach. So yeah, I think, there's a lot going on there. A lot of different operating models, but that seems to be the one that's coming out.
Yeah, like analytics engineers in particular are interesting. I feel like especially it got, it started to really be ignited by the DBT folks. And so anytime somebody comes up to me and they're like, I'm an analytics engineer, then I pause for a minute and I'm like, do you use DBT? And they're like 60, 90% of the time, they're like, yes, I do. How did you know? Well, you called yourself an analytics engineer. But like a lot of the trust isn't, it's not just on the central data office, right? To be able to manage data trust in the organization. So much of the responsibility falls on the analytics engineer who's writing the transform, the report creator who is, deciding, how that information is represented and how you filter, and like, oh, there's, 10% of the results are null. Do I include it in the chart? Do I exclude it? Like, so much of what happens with trust is embedded in all these different points, and it all has to work in concert.
Yeah, and turning it into the language that the business speaks, because you have that conformed language at the enterprise level, and then each area still has their own metrics. They still count things differently. That shouldn't be a problem. It should just be documented that there are differences, and differences are okay as long as you understand them.
Yeah, I this is what I'm wondering, like how much have we like just spread ourselves too thin? Like there's so much stuff. Like the surface area is so broad now, but does it really need to be that broad? I wonder. And I don't know. I mean, Tim, you're the product guy, the team. Like, what is I just feel like we're making these teams a little bit too complicated, or do we need to have this complexity in a way?
I don't know. I struggle with this because like on the product side, right? You tend to have somebody who wears like a product manager hat, which maybe connects to like a data product manager, right? Or a data steward if you're using more of a sort of a traditional approach, right? And then you've got a designer usually, right? What is the equivalent of a designer in the data world? Like, I don't know, right? Is that the analytics engineer who's making semantic choices and things like that, right? And then you've got the engineer, the software engineer. But like, how does governance come into the software side, right? Well, we have like a religion, it's called Agile, and like we're supposed to follow it. And, there's another religion called DevOps, and we're supposed to follow that. But we don't have those same religions on sort of the data side. It's a little more like maybe data mesh was trying to be a religion, but we, some of the believers became non-believers after a couple of years. But I don't know. That's a good question. I don't know if Francis, you have a perspective on all that.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there. Where to start? Where to start? I think there is a lot. I think the handshakes for me are the bits that's important, and it's where your responsibility drops and the next person picks it up. And I do think we've got some grey areas there with the rules that we've got, and I think that there is a need for someone to actually understand the domains end to end. And I think that's what we're trying to push very much at the minute, where the company I'm working with is, how do we get somebody that just sees the data from, they're not necessarily responsible at each point, but they have this overall vision of, right, this is where my data originates, this is where it goes, this is where it was used for. I'm okay with it being used for that. I'm not okay with it being used for that. I want more quality bars put in to make it better. Yeah, I think the structures, there's a lot there.
Who is it that's usually doing that?
Agile.
Is that a data architect? Is it a data product manager?
The design.
Well, the piece where it's like, hey, I'm orchestrating. Who's orchestrating?
Yeah, who's the conductor around this stuff, right?
I think it has to sit more with someone in the business who knows what it's being used for at the end. And then they work with the data teams to get their requirements in there. And I think it comes back to, we can't just sit there moving data around if we don't really understand what it's used for and the impact that it's having. So I do think it has to be someone with some business knowledge at the end that's following it through and saying, I know we capture customer data here. I know we do this to it here. It gets used here.
And I think
ideal. Yeah.
And I think that if we, again, let's put labels aside of like the data products and stuff like that. But if we start coupling, there is data here's data and here is this particular use case, and these things exist kind of separately. We can talk about this use case, and we can talk about why is that important and who cares about it and how is this going to drive revenue, how is it going to save cost, whatever. Like, we talk about that use case in isolation of anything else, and then we say, hey, here we have this data that should be able and this data, we can talk about the data itself also in isolation. This data is coming from here. It's being used for these things. And you're like, okay, how can this data be used to support this use case or not? You start tying these things together. And I think this is kind of the mix. This is that mix that has been missing. And I think this is like, how do we orchestrate that data over here and that use case over here? And then once you start identifying and kind of coupling these things together, we're not talking about these things in isolation anymore. Like, oh, this is where 1 + 1 is greater than 2. And we're like, oh, look, that use case, by the way, I don't care about what the data, the technical stuff, that use case is very similar to my use case. Can I go reuse that for my use case or not? And we can now actually have the conversation at the use case level, not at the data technical level and so forth, right? You can then flip it around. I hope, look, my data is being used there. Maybe my data can be used for your, like, so I think starting this combination is something that we can start having now. And at the end of the day, I think combining that data with the use case and because there's people involved with it, that's where the trust comes in. It's like, yeah, there's the people behind that use case and why they need it and what is minimal for I go forward that use case. That's where the trust comes in. And I think that's kind of, I think we're realizing ourselves now as an industry that, again, this is the social technical, right? The social is a use case, the technical is the data.
Yeah. And I think if I think back to like my data warehousing days, it was all, go and work on it for 2 years and then you become back with this thing and you're like, you can answer all your questions from here now. This will answer everything. You've gone away, you've asked the business questions, you've arranged it, got your bus matrix, give it all. People don't have 2 years to wait for this stuff anymore. So we have to work in a slightly different way, right? We have to be, right, use case driven, whilst also having this, right, how are you creating the backbone of the organization, right? So there will be some critical points that you need. And I always kind of think, right, if you can get that golden thread at the beginning and you can say, right, I have a customer, a product, I have, interactions, I have transactions, get that thread, get that right, and then start adding all the other stuff, right? You can always left out a join back to a source system to get it, to add it in for the next use case. But if you can get the backbone working and then add everything else on as per use case, you'll get that, 20% that gets 80% of the use case is done a hell of a lot quicker.
I call that the iron thread. So we're very much
iron thread.
Yeah. All right. Let's hit our lightning round session. Okay, I got the first one. By the way, we can keep talking. I love when we're just like, oh, we're 45 minutes in.
This is a good conversation. I could go for longer.
Okay. All right. So first question. So you mentioned metadata and semantics when talking about what the components of trust are. Are data teams spending more time thinking about metadata and semantics? Because metadata and semantics are not always on the tips of engineers and analysts' tongues.
I think people are talking about it, especially the last 18 months. People are starting to talk about metadata more. I think semantics, the word semantics is going over people's head a little bit at times. I think some people do know it. But a lot more people are talking about the meaning of what they're seeing. So yes, I've got my dashboard. Great. I can see a lot of RAG things on it. What does that mean that that's red? Like, what do I now need to go and look at? And it's that's now the questions that are coming out. And then once they've got that, right, okay, so this needs to happen next. Who is going to do that? So it is getting to that next level of like, what am I looking at? Who's going to do that? Whose responsibility is that, etc. So yeah, I do think it is being talked about more.
Right.
That's interesting. The word meaning. All right, second lightning round question. Do you recommend data products in a data marketplace approach as a key way to be establishing trust with data?
Yes, I think it gives the ownership to the product. Somebody's then taken on responsibility for it, which I think is something that's been missing on kind of the final deliverables of a data solution in the past.
So then my question is, do you have to have a catalog to enable trust?
Not necessarily. You have to have something. You have to have something where people know to go. You need that shop window. Where's your shop window? It could be a catalog. You could start with an Excel spreadsheet, start with something, and then build it out.
100% agree.
I 100% agree with that. I tell people your first catalog should better be a spreadsheet and make it use and make it work until it stops working, and then you realize, oh, okay, now I know what works and what doesn't work, and then I'm hitting the scale problem. So
get a catalog when that doesn't scale, right? Otherwise, you may be starting with a solution instead of starting with the problem. All right, fourth and final lightning round question. Do you think that we'll ever get to some sort of a personalized trust score? I think people are very excited about like quality score and like the scoring things. Like, is it possible that someday we'll get to like a personalized trust score, or do you think that trust is too complex to that be the result?
don't think it'll be a personalized one because I think people are too complex. But I think you could create a framework which you could then apply a trust score to based on some very kind of key points.
Okay. And maybe like things like persona and things like that might come to play. I know you mentioned like maybe this is good for data scientists, but not good for the business analysts, things like that.
Exactly. It's going to be down to kind of the use case that what people are using it for and how trustworthy it is for that use case, rather than you can trust this blanket as a person for anything.
No, very, very insightful.
All right. Takeaway times. Tim, take us away with takeaways.
Oh my goodness. So much good stuff. I say that every time, but especially this time, lots of good stuff. All right. How do you become data and trust driven was sort of our first opening question here. And you said like, a lot of folks, they're using their gut around kind of making kind of a determination. Can I trust this data? And really what you want is not for your gut to be your conscience, but data to be your conscience. And understanding the data is what's going to really provide trust. If you see numbers and it doesn't pass the sniff test, how do you believe that, right? So how do we get to a better understanding and a structure and a process around trust? And then we get started to go into the definition of trust. What is trust? And you said it's a firm belief, might be kind of the dictionary definition. But another way to think of it is like if it's a person, and you're going to lay back on that data and that dashboard, will it catch you? And I think it's a fun kind of analogy to think about it. And like, would you fall back, or would you be like, nah, like I'm going to go compare spreadsheets here? So that's a little bit of how to think about trust. How do you establish trust? Well, like what do people think about it? Go ask them, right? And figure out, depending on their persona, depending on their use case, where are they on a trust spectrum, right? Are they on the side of like, oh no, I never look at that because I can't trust that, or I look at it but I laugh, all the way to, oh yeah, I rely on this every single day. It comes from Frances, and everything she provides me I know is high quality, and I know the lineage of it, right? Where is it on that spectrum? Learn the stories about how the data was used and when something went wrong. And look at the complexities of that history, right? Like, for example, you might hear somebody say, hey, we don't really trust this dashboard. And you say, why? It's like, well, it makes us pretty nervous because, 3 years ago, one time our entire business went offline because we depended on this dashboard and it went offline. And, well, has it gone offline in the last 3 years? Well, no, but that one time really scared us, right? It's like, okay, well, it's been 3 years now. So maybe it's actually pretty trustworthy now, right? So I think you really focus on a lot of these personal nuances, which I think is very interesting. Trust is personal. And it can even be things like, the person told you that's a good dashboard or a good data set, or they forwarded it to you. All of that affects whether you trust something. And we talked a little bit about like trust and data products, and how does data products and data product management tie to trust. You mentioned that in general, the fact that something is a data product levels it up in some way around the level of trust you can have around it, the level of certification that's around it. We talked a little bit about some different approaches to certification, like medallion, like, certified yes or no. In general, you had mentioned that, hey, it's really like what's right for your organization. Some organizations love doing medallion, some hate it. You may not want to have medallion for 3 different layers, because then you can get into situations where like it's a gold dashboard but a silver table. Is that good? Is that bad? Can I trust that? I don't know. So really do what's right for you, but really think about the different purposes and the different personas, because depending on that, maybe it's fine for exploratory but not for regulatory. Maybe it's fine for data scientists but not for your data analysts. So lots of good stuff there. Juan, what were your big takeaways?
Well, I love to, how should data leaders think about trust? And I said, I like this. Quality tells you how good it is. Metadata tells you what it is. The marketplace helps you find it easier and know if it's certified, the policies around retention and life cycles. But the main one is, what do people think about it? That sentiment of the perception is the biggest factor on whether something is trusted or not, or what did your colleague tell you, right? I like how we talk about put data into people's side of things, right? Get people, like when employees get onboarded, right? How are we getting people to realize that this is the data that's out there? This is the one that you should use for these reasons. Here's the people you should go talk to. And we also, part of that life cycle, just get rid of the stuff that's just noise, right? Let's eliminate that noise. Yeah, I love it. This is a bold statement here. Data product ownership is more important than the data product itself. And this is a profound truth, I would say, because it's like we could have a debate around this, and I think we could have a fantastic data product, but if nobody's really taking ownership, accountability around that stuff, then yeah, maybe it stops being.
Sorry to interject, but we did hot takes over at Gartner last week, and a great hot take would be data product management is more important than data products.
I like that one. We'll see.
Anyways.
All right, we talk about data governance and the namings and different roles. So is it really enablement? And I like how we say, like, hey, that enablement is coming a lot from the whole hub and spoke, centralized data mesh, because you want to enable the spokes to go do things. Is it really about ownership? Is that the term around there? And there are all these other roles in this space. Data quality, we're talking about analytics engineering. So there is this very broad kind of all these, the surface area is pretty broad. And I think this is just a sign as an industry we're maturing around this. Like I said, we used to go away for 2 years and build a perfect warehouse, perfect, quote unquote, right? We don't have time for that anymore. I mean, how many times do we go spend borrowing 6 months turn into 2 years and this product turned into millions of dollars, right? But I like you use the term golden thread. I use the term iron thread. Let's start with that golden thread. Have a customer, a product, the interactions. Let's get those core things right. Then you have that backbone that is working, and you can just start adding things to that are based on whatever use case from there. Woof! How did we do?
Yeah, great. Great summary.
Well, that was all you. So cheers. Thanks. All right, to wrap up, 3 questions. What's your advice? Who should we invite next? What resources do you follow?
Advice, go talk to people. Just talk. Find out what's going on in their head. You can't guess it from looking at the data. You need to go and talk to people. What was the next question?
Who should we invite next?
Who should we invite next? There's a lady that I worked with shortly before I left Accenture, who I stayed in contact with, Arielle Rowland. She's doing a lot of stuff in the data product space. Recommend her.
Perfect.
Excellent.
We're going to add that. And then what resources do you follow?
I mostly follow podcasts, to be fair, because I can walk and listen to them and run and listen to them, which is basically the only spare time I get. I also read a lot on LinkedIn, a lot of blog posts that go up there as well.
Shout out to the podcasts that you listen to.
So obviously you guys. And then Let's Talk Data, which is very much focused on D&I as well. So a lot of kind of how diversity in data is really important. And then Driven by Data, which is another quite a big one in the UK. I don't know if it's big in the US yet or not.
Awesome. Well, Francis, it is truly a pleasure that we get to have the opportunity to meet folks like you. First of all, who know you've been listening to us. I know we met you at a Big Data London a couple of years ago, and it's just really like an honor to know that there's folks like you who are listening to us, and then we get to actually interact and meet, and then kind of build a relationship. And every time we're in London, I'm like, you're the first person who I reach out to. It's like, hey, I'm in London. Let's go do this thing and so forth. Let's go out and have drinks and go for dinner. And having the podcast is just really it's a huge high here. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Awesome.
Thank you. And thank you for this conversation, and just looking forward to hanging out in a couple months. We're back in London. We go back all the time. We'll be there for Gartner in May and more. So
awesome. Thanks for having me.